Okay. All right. Um, I know that it's Memorial Day and that Mincha Mariv has now moved late enough that it conflicts, but there isn't actually a different time that I can teach. So I'm just going to do my best to make sure the class is recorded, which hopefully it is being recorded. And we're going to meet for another couple of weeks and then another few weeks, and then we're going to take the summer off anyway. So we'll just do our best for the moment. Um, in any case, let's get started. This is part 24 in our ongoing series on the fourth chapter of Bava Metzia. We are going to start on page 56a and go to page 57a. This is a little bit longer than most of the shiurim that I give, and I hope we'll get through everything. If not, we'll leave some stuff for next week. But there really wasn't a good stopping place before where I went to. So we'll try to get to the end of the packet, and if not, we'll finish it next week. All right. We start with the Mishnah. So these are things that don't have ona'ah. And just to remind you, ona'ah is where if you charge a sixth too much or you pay a sixth too little, then the transaction has to be fixed by repairing it, by giving more money, or by giving back some of the money that you took. If you overcharge by more than a sixth or underpay by more than a sixth, the transaction is just reversed and you have to give everything back to its original owner and start over again. But ona'ah only applies to certain kinds of purchases, and our Mishnah is about things that ona'ah does not apply to. It's not clear what it means that ona'ah applies to. It does not apply. It's not clear whether that means that there simply are no rules or that there's a different standard for what it means to charge too much or to pay too little. That's a fight that's continued since the time of the Mishnah. We're not going to resolve it. You should be aware that it's not clear what it means to say that it doesn't have ona'ah. Okay, these are the things that don't have ona'ah. Ha'avadim, v'hashtarot, v'hakarkaot, v'hakdeshot. Slaves, and these are going to be Eved Kanani, right? Canaanite slaves, not Eved Ivri, is a different kind of transaction completely. And documents, when we say documents, we mean buying and selling IOUs, right? I owe you $100, and you can't collect from me until the date it says that I'm going to pay you, which I don't know, in September, but you need money now, so you sell the right to collect the IOU to somebody else, presumably at a discount, both because they can't get the money now and because they may never get it because maybe I won't pay, maybe I'll run away, maybe I won't have any money, whatever. So for $80, you sell this $100 IOU. So that kind of sale is not subject to ona'ah. And land, let's assume that means real estate. That includes buildings. And sanctified property. So the same category of items also don't have a payment of double. That means if somebody commits a robbery, right? They sneak into someplace and steal something, then they would normally have to pay back twice as much as what they took. But they don't in this case. And at least in the case of the land, presumably that's because it's not possible to sneakily steal land. Land is sort of sitting out there in public. You can't take it away with you in your pocket. You can't take it away at night and then be gone the next morning, right? That's not how stealing land works. So it may just be that with the land that it's just not physically possible to commit a robbery that way. But in any case, these four things don't have a double payment, and they also don't have a payment of 4 and 5. It's a little mysterious why the Mishnah found it necessary to tell us that, since the only things that ever have a payment of 4 and 5 are robbery in which you take sheep or cows, which I guess sanctified property could include sheep or cows, but the other things can't. In any case, there wouldn't be that 4 and 5 times payment. Shomer chiname no nishba, a person who is taking care of these things as a favor for somebody for free does not swear, right? Ordinarily, if I am watching your belongings for free and the stuff is stolen or destroyed or lost or dies or whatever, something happens to it that's not my fault. It happened in a way that I didn't cause it. Then I need to, if I'm willing to swear that I'm not the cause of the loss and that I didn't use the thing, because if I used it, then I'm not taking care of it for free, then I'm a borrower instead, which is a whole different thing. If I'm willing to swear to those things, then I don't have to pay unless it's actually somebody can prove that I did something negligent that caused the loss. But with these things, the slaves and the land and the documents and the sanctified property, if I just assert plausibly that it's not my fault, I don't have to pay. I don't have to swear. And in Nosei Sachar, Mishalem, likewise, in those same cases, a paid guard would have to pay for the stuff, because it's the reason you pay a guard is to stop the thing from being stolen or from running away. Natural death they would not have to pay for, but anything that they could plausibly have prevented, they would have to pay if it destroyed it. And apparently not in case of the land and the documents, the slaves, and the sanctified property, which raises the question of why you would pay a guard if there are no consequences to failing to do your job. It's not clear why you would pay somebody to watch your stuff, but if supposing you did, they don't have to pay if it's this stuff. Okay, Rabbi Shimon has a modification. He says that when we've said sanctified property before, what we meant was this: Karashim shehu chayav b'achrayutan yesh lahem onah, v'she'inan chayav b'achrayutan ein bahen onah. Rabbi Shimon says sacrifices that you are obligated to replace have onah, and if you're not obligated to replace it, it doesn't have onah. So it works like this: if you say, I'm going to bring a cow as a sacrifice, I think I'll bring this cow. Then if the cow that you designated dies, runs away, gets lost, whatever, you need to replace her because you made a commitment to bring a cow. And then you said that you would fulfill that obligation by bringing this cow, but you have this sort of prior obligation to bring a cow in general, as opposed to if you're the only thing you committed. Oh, I am so sorry. You're right. I forgot to share the screen. There we go. If the only thing that you committed, there we go. I'm so sorry. Thank you for letting me know. If the only thing that you committed is that you will bring this cow, and you didn't say you'll bring a cow, then if this cow dies, runs away, gets stolen, gets abducted by aliens, whatever, then there's no responsibility to replace the cow because your only obligation was to bring this particular cow. You can no longer do that, so you're done. Okay, so those are the sacrifices that you're responsible to replace and ones that you're not responsible to replace. And Rabbi Shimon says the ones you're responsible to replace do have onah, because the things that you're responsible to replace are, in a sense, still yours. They still have the capacity to cost you money if they disappear. That is a feature of things that belong to you. It's not the only feature of things that belong to you, but it is a feature. And so they are still enough yours that they're not really sanctified property for the purposes of this Mishnah, and they would still have onah. Now, it's forbidden to sell them, but he might be talking about a case in which the sacrifice has developed a blemish and you need to sell it in order to replace it with an unblemished animal. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda has a different qualification he wants to make. Rabbi Yehuda says, Av hamocher sefer Torah behema umargalit ein lehem onah. Rabbi Yehuda says, I want to add 3 more items to the list of things that don't have onah. And he wants to add a Sefer Torah. Presumably, the reason why he wants to add the Sefer Torah is because a Sefer Torah is priceless. And the idea of hauling someone into court and saying you committed a crime because you charged too much money for this Sefer Torah, it's sort of the same thing as making a public declaration that the Sefer Torah is not worth as much as this person paid for it. That I think he feels like that's theologically sort of icky. And that might not be a strong enough statement to change the legalities of the situation, but I do think that's the starting point for trying to exempt Torah from ona'ah. And the deal with the animal and the gemstone or the pearl seems to be that when you buy and sell either animals or gemstones, they are worth dramatically different amounts depending on what the customer already owns. If I already own one ox, I need a team of oxen that are the same size and shape to, stand together wearing this yoke and then pull my wagon together in an even way so that it goes in a straight line. I need oxen that are the same height, and I need them to be the same strength. Possibly I need them to get along well together. Oxen aren't random that way. So if you happen to have the ox that's the perfect match for the one I've already got, or for that matter, if I'm mating my cows or my sheep, and you happen to have the animal that's perfect for whatever mating scheme I'm working on, then that animal is worth more to me than it is to other people. So you can't really talk about an absolute value for animals. And the same thing is true for pearls or for gemstones, that if I'm making a piece of jewelry and I need the pearls as they go around the necklace to get slightly smaller and slightly pinker, right? Or whatever it is I'm working on in this particular piece of jewelry, then if you happen to have the missing piece in my set that I'm missing, that's worth more to me than it is to some other random person. And so Rabbi Yehuda says, you can't talk about the correct price or an incorrect price for these things because they have different prices for different people, and that's legitimate. In any case, the other rabbis don't like this, and amru lo amru ela. Sorry, but these are the only exceptions there are. This seems to be a claim that it's a technicality. Right? We learned in a technical way from a midrash halacha that land and slaves and sanctified property and documents are exceptions to this rule, and that's it. You can't use logic to figure out why they were exceptions and then add things to the category. It's just those things. Okay. Gemara says, Minahanimi. So where do we get this idea that there are things that are exempt from ona'ah? And here we go to last week's parsha, sort of ironically, to the section on how not to defraud people when selling land. Okay, so we're in Parshat Bahar at Pasuk 20, chapter 25, Pasuk 14. And here we are. And the Torah is talking about the fact that there's going to be this reset that's going to happen in land ownership at Yovel. And therefore, it is important that you charge an appropriate price for your land that's a price for effectively a rental, not a sale, because you can't sell it. Okay, and so then the pasuk says, "V'chitim karumim kar lamitecha." When you make a sale to your fellow, or you buy something from your fellow, al tanu isha tachif. Don't oppress, don't cheat, don't do ona'ah to each other. Okay, so the rabbis learn from this, davar hanikne miyad liyad. It says you're going to buy from the hand of your fellow. So that means it has to be something that my fellow could put into my hand, from his hand. So yatsu karka ochen and mentality, that excludes land, which you can't pick up. And yatsu avadim shehu kshu lekarkaot, and it also excludes slaves, which are everywhere in halacha presumed to be a form of real estate. That this is based on their being mentioned with real estate a number of times in the Torah, but it's enough that all over the place, anytime it matters whether something is real estate or whether it is chattel, slaves are always real estate in halacha. So they're gonna get excluded with the with the land, even though presumably at least a small slave you could pick up and hand them to somebody else. We pick up human beings and hand them to other people all the time. Yatzu shtarot, and it also excludes documents dichtiv v'chitim karu mimkar, because it said when you sell a sale, you sell something which is sold, gufo machur, it has to be that you're selling the thing itself. The gufo kanui, and the thing itself is being bought. Yatzu shtarot ein gufan machur, that excludes documents because the thing itself there is not being sold. Ve'ein gufan kanui, and the thing itself is not being bought. Ve'ein omdim el l'raya shebehem, and the only purpose is for the proof that is found inside. Meaning, when you sell a debt, we call that selling the document. But the fact is, what you're actually selling is an abstraction. Right? The ownership of the piece of paper is almost incidental. Yes, you do need the piece of paper in order to collect the debt, but the ownership of the piece of paper isn't the point. The point is that this person now owes you money instead of owing me money. And that's not the paper. That's an abstraction that's referenced by the paper. So the thing itself is not what's being sold. So they said, by the way, what that means is that if you do sell documents, not selling the debt that's in the document, but selling the actual piece of parchment to be used by a perfumer to make bottle stoppers, right? When your parchment is done being used as parchment, it's still a piece of animal skin. You can, roll it up into a ball and stick it into the mouth of a bottle as a bottle stopper. So if that's what you're selling it for, then in fact what you're selling is the parchment, not the debt. And in that case, yesh lahem onah. That would have onah because then you're selling the object itself. I said it was ironic that we're learning that onah doesn't apply to land from the passage about how to not commit the sin of onah when selling land. But that's something that one could say a lot about. But for the moment, I'm just going to say that because if I go down that rabbit hole, I'll still be talking 45 minutes from now about it. But for now, I just want to point out that the point there is that you're not really selling the land. And the Mishnah here, presumably, or the Gemara here is presumably talking about a situation where you're actually selling the land for real, not selling the right to use the land temporarily. And that, in fact, is definitely not what the verses in last week's Parsha are talking about, because the whole point there is that in the world the Torah is imagining in the land of Israel, it's not possible to sell land in the land of Israel permanently. The only reason we can do that now is because we don't actually know who is supposed to own it. So in principle, at least, when you sell land now in the land of Israel, you're selling it temporarily until we figure out who it belongs to. But that temporarily until we figure out who it belongs to has been going on for 2,500 years, since not even since the Babylonian exile, but since the Assyrian exile of the other 10 tribes. Right. So that's a very, very long time. It's almost 3,000 years. And I would say temporary at this point it doesn't look so temporary. It's gone through lots of people's real lives. Okay. Moving along. Okay, so they say pshita. Now that's obvious, meaning it's obvious that if you sold your parchment to the perfumer to make bottle stoppers out of course there should be only, because as I said before, you're not selling the abstract information that's written on the parchment, you're selling the actual piece of animal skin. And they say, no, it's not so obvious. It's not unnecessary to say it. You do need to say it because we have this other position of Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana said there's no problem with ona'ah with things that are really inexpensive. Something that only costs a pruta to begin with, you can't overcharge or underpay for it. And so this statement that you do have ona'ah for parchment sold as bottle stoppers would tell us that we don't rule like that position of Rav Kahana, so we do need to say it because it does mean something. In fact, we learn from this that there is a rule of ona'ah even with release with items of very small value. Okay, moving along to our hekdeshot. Hekdeshot. So what about the sanctified property? Where do we learn that from? Okay, so the end of the pasuk that we quoted before ended al tonu ishet achiv, right? Don't do ona'ah a man with his brother. A man with his brother is a perfectly ordinary way for Tanakh to say with each other. A woman with her sister, likewise, also means with each other. But sometimes we choose to take it literally. So Amar Kra Achiv, the Torah said his brother, Achiv v'lo hekdesh. It means that you're buying and selling things with another human being, not with the temple treasury. Okay. Matkif la Rabba Bar Memel. So Rabba Bar Memel challenged. Kol hecha dichtiv yado yado mamashu. So remember that we said a moment ago that we're deriving the exclusion of land from the fact that the pasuk spoke of buying something from the hand of your fellow. The thing is that the Torah speaks of taking things from somebody's hand or giving something to somebody's hand many times. And Rabbi Abba Bar Memel is not convinced that they are all meant literally to be about a human hand. So he wants to examine this. So he says, is it really true that everywhere it says his hand, it really means his hand? Elameata. So if you're going to say there, you're going to also have to say it here, and it's not going to work. Dichtiv. Vayikach et kol artso miyado. So now we are toward the end of Sefer Bamidbar. Bamidbar 21-26. And we've just won a war. We just won a war against the Emori. And it's we just took possession of a place called Cheshbon and all of its suburbs. So it says Ki Cheshbon ir Sichon, because Cheshbon was the capital city of the king of Sichon, Melech HaEmori, the king of the Amorites. V'hu nilcham b'melech Moav Rishon, and he had fought with the first Moabite king. Vayikach et kol artso miyado ad Arno. And Sichon had taken all of the first Moabites' king's land from his hand all the way to Arno. Now that sounds like it's, first of all, it doesn't sound like it's talking about taking it from his hand, because it's talking about conquering territory. It sounds more like it's taking it from his control. And second of all, it sounds like whatever from his hand means it can apply to land, because that's what he's taking. So this does seem like a real challenge to our derivation. So Rabbi Abba Bar Memel says, Rabba Bar Memel says, are you going to say the same thing here? That he took all of the land literally out of the hand of the first king of Moab? Nah, that doesn't work. Ella mirushuto. It must really mean he took it from his possession. He took it away from him. So why can't it mean he took it from his possession here? And you buy something from the hand of your fellow could mean your fellow used to own it, and now you bought it, and now you own it. But it doesn't have anything to do with physical hands. So that's Rabba Bar Memel's objection. Okay, so now we're going to respond to it by bringing some things that seem sort of tangential, but we'll connect them back up. But it says in the Braita, Im himatzei timatzei biyado, ein li ela yado. Okay, so in Shmot Kaf Bet, when it's talking about finding stolen property in the hand of the person who stole it, it says if it is found in his hand. Okay, so the Braita says, well, I only know that consequences will ensue if you find him holding it in his hand. But gago chatzero v'karpefo minalan. How do I know that he's also in legal trouble if you found the stolen property on his roof or in his courtyard or in his enclosure? A carpath seems to be an enclosed space that's like out in the field somewhere. Everyone seems to translate it enclosure. I don't know what the right English word for that is. So I'm just following everyone else and using the word enclosure. Talmud Lomar, im himatzei timatzei mikom makom. That's why it used this sort of extra long language, if it will be found in his hand, to tell me that if anywhere you can find it, if it's his, if he's got it, he's in trouble. But let's note that the Breita thinks the reason that the stolen property is considered to have been found in the possession of the thief is because the Torah said, if you find it in these with these extra words, that told us that you find it anywhere in his possession. It doesn't have to be in his hand. The implication of that is, halav hachi, if it hadn't used the extra word, hava amina kol hecha dichtiv yado mamashu. I would have thought that the normal meaning of in his hand is that he's holding it physically in his fingers. And then we have another similar Breita. V'tutanya, we have another Breita. V'natan biyada. This one is about divorce. And the divorce procedure of the divorce is described as he, the husband, will put it in her hand, the wife. So the Breita says, I only know that divorce works if he actually puts it in her hand. Gaga, how do I know that it works if he puts it on her roof, in her courtyard, or in her enclosure, which, by the way, clearly shows that we are presuming the possibility of women owning real estate that is theirs personally, by the way. So how do we know that putting it on her property works just as well as putting it physically in her hand? Talmud Lomar v'natan mikom makom. So the Torah said, put it, he will put it. He will put it means wherever he puts it, as long as it passes into her possession. But okay, so that's the Breita derives the fact that the husband can put the divorce document on her roof or in her house from the fact that it says v'natan. That implies tama dichtiv rachmana natan, that the only reason that works is because the Torah has this extra word. Halav hachi, because if the Torah had not said it that way, Hava amina kol hecha dekatav yado mamash. And then I would have thought that everywhere that it says his hand, it really means his hand. So what we're saying is that if the literature repeatedly finds reasons why in particular cases his hand doesn't mean literally his hand, and instead means his or her abstract possession, then that must mean that normally, when you don't have a special reason for thinking otherwise, normally his or her hand does mean just in his or her possession. And therefore it doesn't, the fact that you bought something from someone's hand should not tell you that it's an object small enough to pick up and carry in your hand. Unless you have one of these words that tells you that this is an unusual case. Ella kol yado mamashu. But in fact, we think that every time it says his hand, it literally means his hand. That would go back to supporting our derivation that ona'ah does not apply to land, because that was based on ona'ah being about a transaction where you take something from someone's hand, buy something from someone's hand. Vishani hatam deleka lememar hachi el birshuto. And now you might wonder, and by the way, what about the place where Sichon, Melech HaEmori, had seized all of the land from the first king of Moab? Well, that's different, because it's not possible to say that that means his hand. So it must be that there it has to be an abstraction. But in general, it's not an abstraction. In general, it is in fact literally his hand, unless we have some reason for believing otherwise. Okay. So we have now concluded that real estate is out, slaves are out, documents are out, and sanctified property. We got through the list. By Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi Zera asked the following question: is chirut yesh lo ona o ein lo? He said, well, okay, buying and selling is controlled by the laws of onah. Renting, not presumably real estate, because that's excluded anyway. But suppose that I rent your cow, or I rent your lawnmower, right? Something that's movable that you could pick up in your hand, or that you could pull with your hand, but not permanent. I'm paying you an amount of money to be able to use it for a week, and then it goes back to you. Okay, so now we analyze what Rabbi Zera's question means. God does say if you sell a sale. So when he said sale, does that mean specifically sale but not rental? Oh, double no, or maybe it doesn't make any difference. You're paying somebody money for something, and that's close enough. Amarle Abaye. Miktiv mimkar leolam. So Abaye says, wait a minute. When it says if you sell a sale to your fellow, does it say a permanent sale? No, it does not. Mimkar stamaktiv. It just says a sale. The hanami biyome mechirahu. And this thing is also in its moment, it is a sale, meaning you have sold the right to use this object for today. You haven't sold the object forever, but you sold the object for today. And that's Abaye thinks that's what a rental is, a temporary sale, and therefore it is included in Ona. Nobody seems to disagree with him. Okay, so now we move on to the case that's going to consume our attention for the rest of the evening. By Rava asked a question. So suppose you took wheat kernels and planted them in the ground. So now are they part of the ground? In which case there's no law of Onah, or there are going to be a bunch of other things that would result from that also, which we'll see in a minute. Or are they still wheat kernels? They're not part of the ground, and if you sold them, Onah would apply. So yesh lahem Onah, ein lahem Onah. Do they or do they not have Onah? And now further analyzing that, Keman deshadyan bekada damyan, v'yesh lahem Onah. Maybe they're like somebody had just thrown them into a jug, in which case they would have Onah. Oh, Dilma, but Flinu al Gav Ara, or maybe they don't really exist anymore because they become part of the land, in which case they would not have Onah because they would be subject to the rules of selling land, and they would be part of the real estate, and they would not have Onah. Okay, so what kind of case are we talking about? We said we have a case in which you planted wheat kernels, but what sort of planting wheat kernel case? Ilema. The Amar Ihu Shidaiba Shita, Va'atu Sahadi Va'amru Lo Shadiba Elachamsha. So if you have a case where the original owner says, I planted 6. I don't know if this means 6 wheat kernels or 6 rows of wheat kernels or 6 baskets of wheat kernels. I'm not sure, but 6 something. And then witnesses come and they say, we saw you planting and we know you only planted 5. So we're not actually digging up the wheat kernels to count them, but we have witnesses to what you planted, and you are committing ona'ah here by not exactly this. Usually the way you do ona'ah is you say, I'll sell you this object. Everybody knows what the object is. We're all looking at the object right now. And then I name a price that's not a fair price. It's a $60 object and I charge you $70 for it. Or if, according to Shmuel, it's a $50 object and I charge you $60 for it. But whatever it is, the thing isn't what's in dispute. Here, it seems like we're not imagining that. We're imagining that you actually lied about how much there is by a 6th. I'm not exactly sure why we're construing the case that way, but that seems to be what we're doing. The witnesses came and said that you only planted 5, you didn't plant 6. But Rava said, Kol davar shebemidah uvemishkal uveminyan, afilu pachot mikdei ona'ah chozer. The problem is that Rava said that this is going to fall under a different Torah law that rules commerce. Anything which can be measured or weighed or counted, the transaction is reversed if you get the amounts wrong, or more likely you lie about the amounts, even if it's by less than a 6th, right? Because it's an entirely different set of mitzvot in the Torah. There's a bunch of them, actually. appears repeatedly, demanding that you have fair and honest weights and measures and counting. So it can't be that the case that Rav is not sure about is a case where the question is how many wheat kernels got planted, because if that were the case, we wouldn't Ona'ah the wrong category. He's committed an entirely different crime, which would apply regardless. That can't be it. It must be a different case. Ella de Amar Ihu Shaddai ba Kid'ibi la the Iglai Milta de Lo Shadi ba Kid'ibi la. It must be that he planted or says he planted the amount that was supposed to be planted on that amount of land. And it turns out that he did not, in fact, plant the correct amount of grain. And this now is vague enough and doesn't necessarily involve measuring or counting. It might just involve, right, you plant all the way to the end of the rows or whatever. That's not a matter of measuring out the amount of grain. That's a matter of continuing going until you get to the end, which is a different sort of thing. So maybe that'll work. And it will turn out that he planted less than was necessary by more than a sixth. In that case, yesh lahamona. So again, is the grain part of the land, in which case it doesn't have ona'ah, or is the grain still grain, which is not land, and does have ona'ah? Right? Commander Shadi Bakada Damyan. Yesh lahamona. Is it as if he had just put it in a container, in which case it has ona'ah? Odima Batlin Huagav Ara, or maybe it stopped existing as an independent entity. When he put it in the land, it became part of the ground. And incidentally, depending on whether it's part of land or not, we have some other consequences. Nishba'in alehen o ein nishba'in alehen. Right? Would the free guard, who we mentioned at the beginning, would they, supposing that they were supposed to be watching the field, they were watching the field and something that's out of their control happened to destroy some of the seeds in the field, would they have to swear about that? Because you don't have to swear about land. So if the wheat kernels are considered part of the land, they don't have to swear. If their wheat kernels are separate from the land, then they would have to swear. Is it as if they're in a container and he does swear? Or is it as if they're now part of the land and he does not, they don't have to swear about them? And then another rule that would apply, Omer Matirano in Omer Matiran. So we're all currently counting something which we call the Omer. The truth is that we're not counting the Omer, we're counting from the Omer. Right? The Omer is a korban, a sacrifice of barley, which is brought on the second day of Pesach. And then we count 49 days from the bringing of that sacrifice until the day before Shavuot, at which point then there's another sacrifice of grain called the Shtei HaLechem, which is brought on Shavuot. And really we're counting from the barley sacrifice of the Omer to the wheat sacrifice of the Shtei HaLechem. In any case, the Omer serves the purpose of making it permitted to eat the new grain, this year's new grain. Pesach falls at the beginning of the barley harvest. Barley is the first grain to be harvested in Israel. And Pesach falls at the beginning of the barley harvest. And once the Omer has been brought, then it's permitted to eat the new barley, and then also the new wheat and spelt and rye and oats that are going to be harvested. Those all get harvested later. So the rule, though, is that it only permits grain that's already growing at that point. It does not permit wheat that is planted after the time the Omer is offered. That would have to wait until next year's Omer offering to be permitted. So, Hechidami, what's our case? ishrush tanin. If it had already taken root, then we taught about that. Idelo ishrush tanin. And if it didn't take root, we taught about that too. Distan. We have a Mishnah. Im hishrishu kodem laomer, omer matira. If you have seeds in the ground and they took root already before the second day of Pesach when the omer is offered, then the omer permits them. Meaning, even though what you have right now is just a itty bitty tiny little plant, is even as long as the plant existed before the omer was offered, then you can wait until the plant matures and produces seeds, and then those seeds will be permitted from this omer, even though the seeds did not yet exist. Okay, the imlav, and if they didn't take root, then asurin ad sheyavo omer haba. Then those plants, when they do finally take root, the seeds that they produce would not be permitted to be eaten until the next spring when the omer is brought again the next time. Now, in real life, this is not a thing usually, because in real life, grain is grown outdoors and it only rains outdoors in the winter. And so the time for planting wheat and barley and other grains is at the beginning of the winter. So if you're in real life, unless you're like doing a science experiment where you're specifically going and carefully watering these individual plants to see what will happen, barring that, if you plant grains right after the omer or right before the omer, they will simply die because they will not have enough water to reach maturity. So this is a thought experiment more than anything else. But in any case, it's a thought experiment that answers the question we thought we were trying to deal with. So it's a lo tzricha. No, in fact, we do need to ask the question. It hasn't been answered already. Because maybe these are barley seeds that just matured. He got them harvested right before Pesach and stuck them in the ground again right before the Omer. The Omer v'chalif ilvaihu v'lo ishrush kodem lo. And then the Omer came and went by. The seeds have not actually taken root. Okay, so what we have is barley seeds that were not permitted to eat because they're this year's crop and it's right before Pesach. The Omer has not been offered yet. And if you had put them on a shelf in the kitchen and waited a few days, they would have become permitted when the Omer was offered. But instead of putting them on a shelf in the kitchen, you put them in the ground. And they have not turned into plants yet. So the question is, are they part of the ground because they're in the ground and they're seeds, so they will eventually take root? Or are they really just seeds from this year's barley crop that is getting permitted because of the Omer and they haven't sprouted? So the fact that they're in the ground is irrelevant and they're still seeds. So maru leminkat min chale. Can you pick them back up out of the ground and eat them? We're not worried about what will happen when they actually form a plant and grow new seeds. That we understand that we'll have to wait for next year. And the question is, these seeds, if you manage to pull them back up out of the ground before they take root, could you eat them? Are they like you had put them into a container, in which case the Omer permitted them? Or maybe they have become part of the ground when they went into the ground, even though they have not taken root. The answer to all of this is teku, right? Once you put seeds in the ground, we don't know. We have to leave it unresolved whether or not the seeds have become part of the ground or whether they're still individual seeds that have all the rules of seeds that are not yet planted, because it's a boundary case, right? Tehu is an indication that you have successfully found the boundary case, which ultimately means you correctly understand the law. If you can find all of the edges of the categories, that means you understand what's going on. So Tehu, it's true that it's a question that doesn't get answered, but it's a success, not a failure. It's a question. The reason it doesn't get answered is because you have successfully found the edges of your category. Okay, that is what I have for tonight. Are there questions? Okay.
Thank you very
I
much.
thank you. I will see you next week. Um, and thank you. Have a great night.